It was good, y'all. I'm back with another one, another vlog video. Now, as far as this one goes, I just wanted to get into something real quick. Okay, at some point I gotta stop saying real quick, cause it ain't gonna be quick. It's gonna be a bit lengthy. Anyway, it's bound to happen, right? But today I actually wanted to get into well, put it this way, this topic is basically talking about anything that has a continuation to something that made a statement the first time around. But whenever you try to rekindle that fire, is it going to be as good as the first, if not better? Or it doesn't hold a light to what the first one did? And then trying to tell a story that's briefly mentioned previously, but then you try to go full on into what that topic was about, why it was being brought up in the first place. Is it possible to get the proper explanation as to why that is? Or it's just for the sake of riding on that brand, riding on the name, just so you can make a buck out of it? And then the next thing pretty much comes with it as well. The next thing, it comes with it as well. They could pretty much be in the same boat. But instead of trying to give the whole entire backstory, it's meant to be a continuation, but it's meant to be an offshoot from the actual franchise itself while it's still within the franchise, while it's still trying to build a world within the world that was introduced, that was created. What I'm talking about is sequels, prequels, and spin-offs. Now, this goes for anything when it comes to literature, when it comes to entertainment, anything that's meant to continue a franchise once the first joint blows up, and then there's meant to be a continuation for the franchise just because of the response it gets, that you want to try to live up to what the first one did, if not do better than what the first one did. Now, that's the first thing I'm getting into with this piece right here, with this video right here, is sequels. When it comes down to a sequel for something, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You put out the first joint. Majority of people, if not everybody, loves it, right? Rave reviews, an overwhelming positive response, right? But then you get into that territory of trying to capture that lightning in a bottle again. Usually when it comes to sequels, a lot of the time, they want to double down on what made the first one successful in the first place. Understandably so. You're trying to venture out to other things, but you're also trying to give people something familiar from what they got previously. I get that. But that's the thing, though, because that could get into sequelitis territory. But based on the experience, when it comes down to just one person making their assessment about how they feel about a sequel that happens, whether they liked it as much, if not better than the first one, or it had potential. The problem was this, that, and the other that was holding it back. It could have lived up to the first one, but it didn't necessarily do that. It gets into that sequelitis territory that when you try to double down on what made the first joint successful in the first place, people worry. People start to worry. And don't get me wrong, I have my fair share of that as well. And that's pretty much the mentality I have going into working on the projects that I plan on putting together. It's always something that when it comes down to the first joint and people they want to get more out of you, once you give it to them, then it's like I'm anticipating, like that would be the mentality, right? I'm anticipating this to be just as good, if not better, than what was out previously, what was put out previously, released to the public previously. So it's like people expect to get that same thing, if not better than just the same thing. The same success, the same reason as to why people praise the first one in the first place. So when a sequel comes out, that's the worry. Because all of the hype surrounding it, all of that build-up, setting the bar that high to have the second joint be as good, if not better. Like I said, I have my fair share of that. I do. There are times I did. But based on my experience, whether it managed to do that or didn't, it's up to me. Just like it's up to y'all. It's up to anybody based on how they feel about it. With a sequel, it's meant to expand on the story, but give you something familiar that came from the first. And that's what I mean by doubling down. Doubling down on what made the first one successful while trying to expand the story at the same time. Expand the world that was being built. So, with that being said, anytime when it comes to a sequel for something, what I do is just go into it see how they were trying to process to give me something familiar, but also expand on what they've done previously, so that it's that feeling like, wow, you actually pulled it off. Or it could just end up being exactly what's been thought of, a cash grab. Just because the first one did great, going into the next thing, it's like, that's expected to do great as well. But that's also the problem. I feel like, for me, when it comes to sequels, I don't overhype myself. Because I knew that if I was going to do that, I'd be disappointed, if not highly disappointed. And it's that mentality, it's that mindset that I've already told y'all about, and that I'm going to continue to do for the rest of my life. To just don't overhype myself, go into it with a clear mind, see the great things that I could find in there. Something that I can appreciate more than just pointing out the flaws that I find. There have been plenty of times I did that. There have been plenty of times when that happens. It allows me to appreciate more for what they were going for. So instead of just looking at the negative aspects of it all, I look more towards the positive things. So when it comes to sequels, it's dangerous territory coming off of the first. People expect things within the second to be just as good, if not great. There have been times that it doesn't always work. Doesn't always work. Because if you're doubling down hard on what made the first one successful, then you've already messed up. They've already messed up. If you're putting too much emphasis on what made the first one successful, you're not focused on expanding the story. You're using the first as a crutch. And that's where the sequelitis come in. Gotta be very careful with that. Yeah, give them something they can remember the first one by, but make sure to expand the story and flesh that out. Simple, right? Not as easy as it looks. That's a given. But that's pretty much the process of going into a sequel. That's the mindset. Give people something familiar, but expand on it, on the story at hand that you're supposed to set the focus on. Now, prequels, second thing. Prequels, when you can have the original series of something, you can have the original series of something, and then you bring up something that people are curious about, but not sure if they want to get the full explanation. It's like they will want to be able to put the pieces together themselves, do the research, and see where that gets them. At least that's how I think. At least that's how I see it. Prequels can be troubling, especially when you get it in TV and movies, especially when you get to do that. Anytime you have an original series to something, and then the prequels come to give the full-on explanation from everything in the original series, that's a territory that's like, the way I look at that, I'm like, yo, that's the kind of territory you do not want to touch. Try to tell a prequel about something that revolutionized storytelling and iconography. That's the thing, because when it comes to prequels, there's three major problems that could come with that. There are three major problems that could come with prequels. The first thing, fan service for the sake of fan service. Anytime you notice something like that happening, it's only because they want to present it to you, to me, to us, as if we don't know, as if we don't get it. Like the whole, remember this, remember that, remember the other? This is what the previous stories were supposed to talk about. This is the explanation of how it happened. But it's just shoved in our face as if we don't know. It's shoved in our face like we don't know it. Even for those of us who are not huge fans of that. Perfect examples. I could give you movie franchises that has done this. You got Lord of the Rings. You got Harry Potter. This is the latest one as well. You got Aliens. You got the Aliens movies, right? I done went on and named 3 right off the bat. You got Star Wars. Star Wars. And now Game of Thrones is about to have a prequel series going once we finish the last season of the actual Game of Thrones show itself. Whenever it comes down to prequels, that's the first thing. Fan service for the sake of fan service. That becomes a problem if it feels like it's shoved in our face as if we don't know this by now. That's the first thing. The second thing going into prequels is, well, like I said, the first thing is fan service. The second thing going into prequels is the execution. The execution is important. If you're going to try to tell a prequel story, the execution is important. Fan service is one thing. Execution is a whole nother ball game, because all of the hype surrounding it, all of that build-up for people to get that explanation they wanted, or if it's something that they didn't want but they ended up getting anyway, and it's underwhelming to the point where it's like, why did they even do this in the first place? Now I don't even care about what they trying to tell. I don't care about what they're trying to tell here. I only care about the original series, because of how they managed to make that work. To tell a prequel story is to give people the explanation from what they saw previously. Yes, reminders of what came previously, but use that sparingly, and the execution gotta work. If it doesn't work, nobody cares. Third problem when it comes to prequels, retcons. That is the third major thing to worry about when it comes to prequels. Anytime there's a prequel story being told and there's a retcon from the previous stories that we get used to, that we're so used to, it's like, wait a minute, what? Why the hell did they do this? That's the first thing that comes to mind. Anytime when it comes to a prequel and there's a retcon, especially when it's done for the worse, there's bound to be outrage. It never fails. Every time there's a retcon for something, when it comes to a prequel story, there is going to be outrage. Especially when that retcon seems like it's an afterthought. It's just thrown in there just because. That's like saying they want to get all of their ideas that they had previously and just throw it into the mix of it all, just for the sake of throwing it in there, just for the sake of throwing it together. That's what ruins the story itself. That's what ruins the characters. So whatever it is that you've known about previously changes. It changes that perspective on how you saw it before. Instead of it being able to stand on its own 2 feet, they're trying too hard to do that. And then on top of that, use the original series as a crutch for the sake of nostalgia. At this point, that would sound like the kind of thing that's being overused right now. Nostalgia works, when it's executed properly. But when it's done to the point like, just gotta shove it down our throats, shove it in our face as if we don't get it, that's a problem. But that's the thing when it comes to prequels, and I already gave y'all 3 of those major problems that comes with prequels. Now before I end this, spin-offs. The last thing I wanted to get into is spin-offs. Spin-offs that's meant to continue the franchise within the same world that's created, but it branches off into becoming its own thing. Especially when you slap the name of the brand on there. That could also lead to some problems as well. Just because you slap a name on there, does that mean it's gonna work on its own while being a part of the franchise that it is? As big as it is, as huge as it is, as known worldwide as it is it gonna work on its own? Is it gonna work? When it comes to a spinoff, you got to be able to allow that spinoff to stand on its own. Yeah, once again, bring it back something familiar, but expanding the story. So that way you get a chance to grow with the world being built surrounding that spinoff, even while it's in the same world as established. Because then, if you're just going to slap the familiar name on there, and it's all for a cash grab, it's all just so you can get people reading or getting their butts in seats, just because you slap the name on there, that's messed up. Because the next thing you know, outrage again. There's going to be outrage again. Or maybe not flat out outrage. It'll just be a disappointing response. If you're going to spin off something, allow it to stand on its own. Yeah, you're bringing back the familiar aspect of it all. Yeah, but at the same time, you got to expand the story if that's what you're going to do with it. You got to expand the story. Allow us to grow with the story being told and the characters that's in it. Even when we don't see the characters that we were used to previously. And on top of that, if there was going to be any cameos from characters that we've seen previously show up in a spinoff whatsoever, it's got to be worth it. Otherwise, you just throw them in there just because, oh, that's a familiar face. I'm tired of that as well. I'm tired of that. You're going to throw a character in there just for the sake of fan service again. Like, hey, remember this face? He's going to show up here. Or she's going to show up here. And for what? Just to be there? For no other reason than that? If that's what you're going to do, then it shouldn't have been done in the first place. There's no reason for it then. So, with that being said, to cap this off, once again, y'all, for all of y'all who's supporting me and trying to see this, all of this, seeing it through with me, being patient with me as I continue to try to grow with this thing. Thank y'all. And as I start to get more traffic along the way, that's all I care about. Those who appreciate what I'm trying to do here. If you can see what I see, but make up your own mind about it, that's all I ask. That's all I ever want. So with that said, this is Blue Flames the Poet, and I'm out.